Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening to this. I'm your host, Leafy Potato, and welcome to a new series that I am starting called The Joy of NRTS. It is a podcast where I talk about all things NRTS. Basically, if you've been in the Discord for long enough and you've seen my ramblings, I'm looking to do something sort of like that, a little bit more structured, a little bit more professional, and also in an audio format, so it's a little bit easier to just have in the background and going, because I understand looking at walls of text can be quite difficult. On today's episode, I would like to reflect on the idea of indirect strategy, what it is, how to best apply it, and when you're attempting to apply it, best practices. So, I think before we go into all of that, we should first touch on, ultimately, how a game of NRTS is won. At some point, you must destroy all of the enemy command centers, whether that be you and your team destroying all of the enemy team's command centers, whether that be in a 1v1 context, destroying the only enemy command center that matters. In any case, that command center must be destroyed, and the opponent's going to put up some amount of fight. They're going to try to defend their command center, and they're going to try to kill yours, right? So, in a contest between two players, who ends up winning? Ultimately, it is my opinion that the player that ends up winning a match of NRTS, or the team that ends up winning the match of NRTS, depending on the game mode you're playing, is the one which has the ability to take fights on their own terms and with an overwhelming superiority of force. So what do I mean by on your own terms and overwhelming superiority of force? On your own terms simply means the opponent must abide by your preferences, right? If you want to fight within your static defenses, fighting on your own terms would simply be fighting with your static defenses. How to get the opponent to oblige you is the trick, and it's one of the most difficult things to do, but there are ways to do it. Next, overwhelming superiority of force, right? There are different numbers that you can use to measure force. You could do it in terms of just raw numbers of units. You could do it in terms of DPS. You could do it in terms of speed, maneuverability, HP. Doesn't really matter. The most important thing, though, is superiority of force is guaranteed when you have A, more stuff than your opponent, and B, that stuff is strictly better. If my opponent has 3 light tanks and I have 27 heavy tanks, there is virtually no world in which those light tanks can win. Strictly speaking, it's nearly impossible for me to lose that fight if I have the heavy tanks, because I've got more, and they're better. So, that's my theory, generally speaking. Having an overwhelming superiority of force generally also assists you in allowing you to take fights on your own terms. If I have more stuff than my opponent and my stuff is better than theirs, I can force a fight by simply pushing my opponent back into a corner, and if my own terms involve me being able to fight into enemy static defense and a prepared defensive position because I simply have that much more stuff than them, then suddenly the opponent physically cannot refuse my request. I charge into them and they die. Now, of course, that's a lot easier said than done. How the heck am I supposed to get so much more than my opponent that I can just blindly charge into their static defense and their army at the same time? That's something that we'll touch on in a little bit. That's not an ideal situation, of course. You'd almost never want to charge into enemy static defense. You'd almost never want to fight their army within that static defense. It's just very costly. Generally, bad idea. In any case, that's the general gist. When your force is superior to the opponent's, it's a lot easier to get your way. You can shove them around the map, you can say, I own this portion of the map, you can establish yourself a lot easier, and if they want to contest that, they do it against a superior opponent, which is ideal for you and terrible for them. Okay, going on. So, we want more and better. First thing, we need to establish how we get there, and it can be kind of intuitive, right? You think about it. Well, I'm going to need more stuff than my opponent. More involves needing to strictly make more stuff, right? If they have 4 of a unit, I want 5, or 6, or 7. And provided that we're making even just the same stuff, that means I need more money than them, right? You make units in NRTS with money. So, we need to be generating more money than our opponent in order to field a larger army than them continuously. Next, we want better units. And again, better units almost always cost more money. You might argue that militia are busted or that choppers are too cheap for what they are, but in any case, in the event that there's just a unit that's better than another one, say the heavy tank compared to the light tank, it's a great example. It's very cut and dry. The heavy tank's just better. It costs more, but provided you can afford it, it's just better. If you could choose between having 3 light tanks or 3 heavy tanks, all else being equal, you want the heavy tanks. And so, that also requires more money. In any case, both more and better required for guaranteeing superiority of force involves having more money than the opponent. If we have significantly more money than the opponent, then we can put ourselves in a position where we have both more and better units, and thus we have superiority of force. Okay, now that's how you make more or better units. More and better requires, of course, a lot more money. Next, to have more units, not just to make more units, but to have them, we need to be preserving them as well. At least we need to be preserving them better than our opponent. And, or, if our opponent's making more stuff than us, like making more, for us to have more, we have to be destroying more stuff of theirs than they are outproducing us. To put it simply, we need to have more units produced minus units lost than them. If I make, for example, 10 militia, the opponent has made 12 militia but has lost 3, I have 10, they have 9, I have more. Even though they've made more than me, they have taken losses. So, to simplify this whole equation, ideally, we can just not lose units. In a perfect world, we don't want to lose any units. In fact, in a perfect world, the ideal military maneuver is one in which I preserve my entire force by not engaging the enemy, yet I put my enemy in a position where they cannot resist my will. I get to take the fight on my terms. How does that work, right? When you fight the enemy, you put your army at risk. And maybe that risk is a lot smaller than the opponent's army, right? But if I'm engaging even in the simple early game fight that almost everyone will at some point engage in, militia versus militia, if I put my stuff in range of the opponent's stuff, my stuff is getting shot at too. Now, if I have more militia than the opponent, then they're going to lose all their stuff before I lose all my stuff, and then I'm left with something, but we both lose. Just they lose more. In a 1v1, that's completely fine. In a context like a free-for-all, that's not fine in the slightest, because whoever is sitting by watching us beat the crap out of each other is now getting ahead by doing nothing. So, in the context of a 3v3, a 1v1, 2v2, whatever, sure, fighting the opponent's fine, but in an ideal world, we allow ourselves to gain a superiority of force without fighting the enemy. Give them no opportunity to destroy our force, give them no opportunity to weaken us, put no risk on our army, and win. Okay, that sounds fine, but again, how do we do that? Well, we want more stuff, we want better stuff. That requires more money. Okay, so we need to put ourselves in a position where if neither us or our opponent are fighting, neither us or our opponent is losing units, so the difference there is going to be how much money are we making a minute. Okay, so we want a strong economy. That's fine, but so do they, right? A competent opponent is going to be making as much, maybe even more economy than you. It might fluctuate a little bit. It could depend on spawns here and there, but ultimately, that's largely irrelevant. They're going to be making housing, they're going to be taking farms, they're going to be trying to shove you around and destroy your units with their units while they're trying to take stuff around the map. They might be placing a tower here or there to defend their stuff. It's overall quite messy. And so, how can we possibly get ahead in a situation where both us and our opponent are trying to make a strong economy? Well, you can attack their economy, and I will wholeheartedly recommend that that be your course of action. You might say, well, that's great and all, but they can attack your economy, and they can. However, the reason why attacking your opponent's economy should be your preferred method of attack, rather than attacking their units. Firstly, when you attack their economy, houses, farms, generators, even workers, none of that stuff can shoot back at you. None of it. Now, maybe the opponent's static defense can shoot you while you try to attack their farms if they've got a tower nearby, or their command center protecting their houses or whatever. So you can still incur damage while you attack the opponent's economy, but by default, the economy doesn't shoot back, and that is good. You can deal significant damage to your opponent by shooting at their economy. Not only do they lose something that costs money to replace, right? $10 for a farm, $45 for a house, $35 for an upgraded farm. That's not insignificant. All of that costs them something to replace. It also loses them money over time, right? If I had a farm that generated $8 per minute and then I lose the farm, then from my previous position, I am losing $8 a minute, if that makes sense, right? So you can sort of poison the opponent in a way by destroying their economy rather than destroying their units. Not only that, when I referred earlier to fighting enemy units as applying risk to your army, it is not only that you're going to incur damage, but that in a straight-up fight, right, a completely even fight, the outcome is random. Strictly random. Now, there is some element of micro to it, but the slight differences in the timings of your units firing and your militia missed a shot, or their light tank missed a shot, or whatever, if you're otherwise completely equal, the outcome of a fight is random. And to put yourself in a position where that random outcome involves you losing your entire army and the opponent having an uncontested army, that's bad. Now, maybe they don't have an army anymore, and you have some, and now you have uncontested control over the map because the opponent can't shoot at you anymore. I mean, that's good, but you can't guarantee that. And there's less room for skill expression when you simply don't have any pieces to move around anymore because you lost a coin flip. So engaging in that sort of army versus army fight is not what you want when you're on an equal footing. You want to seek your advantage by shooting at the opponent's economy, because even if they go and strike back at you just as hard, both of you still have a force left to fight, and so you still have pieces that you can move around the chessboard, right? If I were to, say, take Magnus Carlsen, best chess player on the world, and somebody who's rated 600 on chess.com, both of them only have a king and a queen. I've taken away all the other pieces. Suddenly, the 600 player plays a lot like Magnus Carlsen. Of course, if they have all their pieces, then the game becomes complicated again and Magnus Carlsen shines because the 600 player doesn't know what's going on. They don't have the foresight for everything that could possibly happen. Giving yourself more opportunities is ideal for you. It allows you to seek and exploit opportunities as they arise. If you have no units on the field, again, because you've been engaging with your opponent in a direct confrontation with their units, you don't have pieces to move, and suddenly you're Magnus Carlsen with a queen against a 600 player with a queen, and the game is simple, and you can't progress. In any case, seeking decision economically is ultimately the goal. Not only does an economic decision provide less risk to your army, meaning that you have more opportunity to play, securing an economic victory, as in you now have a higher economy than your opponent, immediately puts you on the front foot. You make more money per minute than your opponent does. You can afford to lose more money per minute than your opponent does and be even. If you and your opponent both lose nothing over time, you just have more stuff, and or better stuff. And that goes into superiority of force, which then goes into you being able to execute your will on the map, fighting on your terms. The ultimate goal, in my opinion, and the ultimate goal in the eyes of indirect strategy, is to force your opponent into a position where they cannot execute their will, and you have incurred no loss. Now, again, your opponent's probably going to strike back at your farms or whatever when you're shuffling your economies about, but if your force is still intact, again, you still have chances. You can maneuver. You can win still. You want to put your opponent in a position where they make less money per minute than you, because that is how you guarantee that you have at least more or better units, and over time, you will have both. Suddenly, if your opponent is aware of the fate that is impending, they know that as the game goes longer and longer, they're going to have less and less of a shot of winning. They now have the impetus to attack you. They need to, right? They're behind. They need to hit you in the farms. They need to hit you in the command center, like take you out of the game if that's possible. And so the opponent gets desperate. The opponent's desperation is your best tool to take a fight on your terms. If the opponent knows that this game is now a ticking timer, suddenly they need to act. They have to act, and you, as the player with the advantage, because you have more economy, meaning that you can make more and better stuff as the game goes longer, can exploit your opponent's need to finish the game or to regain their lead. You can force your opponent to fight into your defensive position, whether that be with static defenses, whether that be with just simply sheer numbers. You can slowly push your opponent around. And again, once you're at the position where you have more economy than your opponent, or your team has a higher economy than your opponent's team, sitting back and doing nothing is great for you, provided you don't lose anything. You can just play defense, and that's really easy compared to playing offense. You force your opponent into taking bad fights over and over, and that hastens the game. Or, even at like a worst case scenario, you have the same army as your opponent, exact same numbers, and they're the same units. So you don't have more and you don't have better. If you have a higher economy, you can force a game with a nuke silo. You make a nuke silo, suddenly, even if it doesn't make a nuke missile, you have the proposition of within 5 minutes being able to launch across the map and destroy the enemy's base, the enemy's army, the enemy's housing, the enemy's defenses, the enemy's nuke silo, which is also important. You deny your opponent the opportunity to gain that same advantage. You get the silo first, you are able to strike across the map at an enemy silo, destroying it. Right. The nuke silo is the ultimate form of forcing your opponent to play your game. Right? They have to destroy it. They must. And if you both have the same units, they cannot force a decision in the same way that you cannot force a decision. So if they're trying to attack into your silo, you and them are on the same footing. It's just that you also have a trump card that you can play to eventually destroy their bases and win the game. So even if you don't trust yourself to execute in unit micro, which you should, but even if you don't, the game can be won with time with a higher eco. And so, to get said higher eco, you should seek to destroy the enemy's economy. Seek to preserve your own, not by fighting the enemy's units, but by forcing the enemy into a position where they cannot rebuild their economy, and or their units must go somewhere else in order to preserve their strength, right? See, any of you who have played a game where you've got choppers over the enemy's base, watching their entire force come all the way back across the map, away from your base, towards theirs to stop your harassment, and suddenly you have no force opposing you taking your farms back, and you've still got choppers in their skies, denying them their farms, right? Forgive me, I've kind of got off track here, as I tend to. We like to deviate from the topic at hand. In any case, I hope that I have at least described in some level of detail, with a lot of rambling, the general idea behind indirect strategy. Okay, indirect strategy ultimately is the idea that the perfect military action is one where you don't fight the enemy and they must concede. Now, how to best apply it? Again, I think you can get an idea. In NRTS specifically, attacking enemy farms with your units rather than enemy units is generally preferable. What then sets you apart from your opponent is your ability to retake your farms, whether that be as simple as walking your worker back to a farm and taking it, or having the right units that force your opponent's attention back to their base instead of it towards yours, which frees you to take your farms back. And then, not only does this allow you to give yourself an advantage at all, it allows you to give yourself an advantage from a very early portion of the game, right? When the opponent and you are both trying to take farms desperately. You need farms. You have to have them. And both of you are expanding. Trying to attack the enemy's units at that point in time isn't really going to work because the only units you're really going to have is militia against militia. And farms are more valuable than militia, not only in terms of them being $10, but they're also generating money. Militia are only $9. You kill a militia, you generate $9 relative to your opponent in terms of value, right? You still retain your value, they've lost $9 of theirs. So now they have to make another militia, which costs them $9 in order to get back to where they were. They also lose time, but that's a subject for another video. By destroying that farm, you destroy $10 in value of your opponent's everything, right? They're now minus one farm, they need to rebuild it, $10. They also, until they rebuild that farm, are down 8 eco, and that's more important. That eco difference immediately provides you with money your opponent never had. And so you can continue to generate value unopposed. The opponent has to has to now destroy one of your farms in order to get back on an even footing. So, how to best apply indirect strategy? Attack the enemy's economy. Refuse to fight their main force unless you have a superiority of force and you're fighting on your own terms. To get that superiority of force, again, you want the higher economy, which is what attacking the enemy's economy intends to do. Provide you with a higher economy by virtue of simply stifling the opponents. Now, as far as best practices are concerned, attacking the enemy's economy is well and good, but if you have to lose units to do so, you should greatly reconsider. If you're having to destroy 2 or 3 towers in order to destroy a farm, and there's any other target that you could be shooting at right now, it probably behooves you to go ahead and choose that other target. If I have to choose between guaranteed damage on my army and no guarantee of damage on my army, I'm going to take no guarantee of damage. Now, you can also get sort of trapped if you're going too far into enemy territory and they've got units on the field, right? Especially if they've got units on the middle of the map. And you attack in towards their territory, their units can kind of clamp you between... they can clamp your units between their army and their base, which then creates a sandwich, which is bad for you, right? You can run away from their army all you want, but you run out of space to run, and then eventually you take damage, and sometimes you lose your entire force. That's bad. You don't want that. So you need to be careful about what targets you select, not just because, oh, it's a farm and it has no defense, but also considering the opponent's ability to punish you for your greed. As far as units that are really good for helping you apply indirect strategy, of course, the units that's the easiest to use, the best in the game, arguably, but the best in the game is the chopper. You already probably have experience with it. You've certainly been attacked by it before. The chopper is very easy to maneuver. It can fly over terrain. You can almost guarantee that it takes no damage throughout the entire game, unless you make a serious micro mistake against enemy choppers or militia jeep. So, choppers are a great tool in order for you to deal indirect damage to your opponent. Now, you do need to be careful. If you make choppers too early, especially in a 1v1, then your opponent can just kill you outright, so you have to have some defense around your base in order to prevent the opponent from rolling through you with a superiority of both numbers and arguably quality, although I'd say militia probably aren't quality. You can just get so many of them for so cheap. So you need to be wary about the enemy being able to generate superiority of force because choppers are relatively expensive for early games, so look out for that. But besides that, choppers are a great tool, especially in team games. If you can have one of your teammates take the pressure off of you, like if the enemies are attacking your teammates rather than you can make an early chopper, get it across the map, and start dealing indirect damage pretty much at minute 1, which is really, really early. Now, beyond that, patience will be your ally. When applying indirect strategy, again, your win condition is having a higher economy, and a higher economy doesn't mean more money now. It means more money with time. So the longer the game goes, the better it gets for you. Do not say, oh, I've got more farms than my opponent, I'm going to go kill them now. That is a great way to lose all of your army and then have no way to protect your more farms and lose all of them. And then get your base rolled eventually by artillery and medic. So you need to be very cautious when you get that economic victory to sit back and say, okay, I need to play slow now. Don't rush it. Let the game play itself. Your opponent must react to you. You don't have to react to them. If it means that you need to get yourself towards a nuke silo where you feel comfortable being able to win from an economic advantage, then get yourself towards a nuke silo. You can pretty comfortably get a silo and have an army on the field by 30 minutes, and then you can have a missile ready to fire at 35. That's a pretty long game, but all things considered, it's a game that you pretty much can't lose unless, for whatever reason, your opponents can generate a superiority of force against you, which only really happens if all of your allies are dead, and the opponents can all take 3 armies against you in a case of a 3v3 and apply it towards your nuke silo. Alright, and I think that just about wraps up what I'd like to talk about today. Forgive me if this is a much, much more rambly video, not even video, podcast than you're used to. I have this very lightly scripted. I did this sort of on a whim. If you have enjoyed what you've listened to so far, and you don't mind hearing me say the same thing over again, and you also don't mind hearing me say the same thing over again, I would appreciate likes and subscribes because, of course, number go up, me happy. It's the same mentality behind watching your money rise when you have 800 eco plus in the late game. Anyways, I greatly do appreciate your attention. I hope that you have a wonderful day. Oh, and before I leave, I do want to mention, I plan to do this at least once a week. I think it's just pretty easy to do. I don't mind talking about NRTS. In fact, I love talking about NRTS. And I think it's just an easier to digest way of doing it than, again, flooding my Discord. So, if you do appreciate what you like, I will be here next week. So look out for that. And in the meantime, hope you have a wonderful day. Stay classy.